Welcome back to segment 2 of this week's lesson on community and independent living. Within this segment, I'm going to talk a little bit about history. And I will tell you, please, 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 check out some of the websites and links that we've provided because there's no way that I can do justice to the history of people with disabilities as it relates to community living. On the other hand, it is important at least to be introduced to this because for a very, very long period of time, and even continuing today, a broad range of people with disabilities have been denied their basic rights to live in the community. And if you've been following along with us as we go through these lessons, my hope is that you've come to the awareness that people with disabilities are no different than anyone else. We all have hopes, dreams, aspirations. We all want to have independence. We all want to be included within our communities. And yet, the reality is, for a lot of people with disabilities, that opportunity has been denied to them. Historically, there was and in some ways still continues, a push for putting people who have significant disabilities in institutions. It's one of the deepest fears I have, if you will, with regard to, my stepson is what happens? I don't want him to be institutionalized, and yet what are the options out there? Because over time, historically, every state in the United States had laws on the books that singled out people with mental and or physical disabilities to be institutionalized. And keep in mind too, and this is something that I think we want to believe, part of it in our hearts is like, you institutionalize someone, it's for rehabilitation purposes. It's to help them gain skills, knowledge, so they can go back out and be in the community. The reality is it's not designed that way. Institutions are meant to segregate. Institutions keep people away, and there's very little planning oftentimes to help people get out of institutions and get integrated into the community. Because we wanted to believe that institutions, historically, are compassionate places where we're focused on rehabilitation, and yet we know differently. This is one of those things where, as I've gotten to be older, I come to look at things and you realize in your lifetime, how can this have been? In 1965, and at that point I was already 9 years old at that point, there was an expose done. And I've got a few slides that I will show you. We've got a link to the entire set of slides. But it's from a book that's called Christmas in Purgatory. And there were two gentlemen who, Burton Blatt and Fred Kaplan. And what they did was they were able to gain access to the back wards of a number of institutions for people with mental illness. But again, back in the day particularly, mental illness and mental retardation, if you will, they were combined together. So you had these institutions that had a wide range of people that, were there, but what kind of services? And the services that Kaplan and Blatt heard about were that it was pretty awful, that there were no services, that it really was just warehousing. And so they went in, and again, when you see these pictures, they're kind of grainy, they're all black and white because 1965, hidden camera kind of an approach. But I want you to look at these next 5 or 6 pictures and imagine what it would be like if you or a family member had to be in one of these places, because it's pretty horrendous. So with that, I'll turn it over and look at some of the pictures. There was a quote, though, and I think this is valuable too, that they put at the beginning of the book, and their quote was, "There is a hell on earth, and in America there is a special inferno. We were visitors there during Christmas, 1965. To provide more context for their work, let me read the preface, and then we'll look at some of the pictures. One of my close friends, Fred Kaplan, is a freelance photographer who has worked for many national publications. We were to arrange to meet with each of several key administrative persons in a variety of public institutions for the mentally retarded. If we gained an individual's cooperation, in spite of the obvious risk he would be assuming with respect to his institutional status and possible job security, we would be taken on a tour of the back wards and those parts of the institutions that he was most ashamed of. On the tour,
Fred Kaplan would take pictures of what we observed using a hidden camera attached to his belt. During the month of December 1965, we visited, at our own expense, 5 state institutions for the mentally retarded in 4 eastern states. Through the efforts of courageous and humanitarian colleagues, including 2 superintendents who put their reputations and professional positions in jeopardy, we were able to visit the darkest corners and vestibules without being detected by ward personnel and professional staff.
So now we're going to look at some of these pictures. So the first picture you see, look at the series of beds there. And the quotes that are associated with these pictures are ones that are actually in the book. These are not ones that I have generated. The next picture, seeing some women just lying, sitting there on a bench, nothing to do. The following picture, a group of looks like primarily men wandering around, some dressed, some not. The next picture of a man sitting there on the steps with a caption, "My friends forsake me like a memory lost." The following couple pictures show images of literally what would be hundreds of baby cribs that were in those institutions as well. Another picture of some kids sitting around, and I like the quote on this one too. It says, "There are only 2 things wrong with most special education for the mentally handicapped. It isn't special, and it isn't education." And that was written by Alice Metzner.
As I just mentioned, the pictures you saw are from a pictorial essay in 1965. Moving forward nearly 40 years, there was a congressional study done in 2003. The administrators in more than 500 juvenile detention centers across the country were surveyed regarding who was in their centers. Surprisingly, 2/3 of these facilities held children and adolescents who were simply awaiting mental health treatment. These children had committed no crime. There was no offense. Their only reason for being there was the state had no other place to put them. Because the families did not have the resource to take care of them, the state ended up putting them in a juvenile detention center. If you look at this map of the U.S., it shows that 33 states held children and adolescents with mental illness without any charges against them. Each night, nearly 2,000 children were housed in these facilities. This accounted for 7% of the entire population in juvenile detention centers. Children as young as 7 years old were in these centers. A quarter provided no or poor quality mental health services. In addition, the administrators reported that half of these facilities provided inadequate levels of staff training.
So in summary, I would say within this segment, we're talking that there's been a long history of segregation and institutionalization. We still have this as an ongoing issue. It's still a problem for many, many individuals, and that particularly and perhaps heartbreakingly so, children, little ones, are not immune from being institutionalized. So with that, we'll move to our next segment where we talk about this idea of access and inclusion as a civil right.